Hi y'all, it's going for 9:30 on Tuesday, October 7th, but I promised at least one more installment. We'll see if I have the energy to get through two of the skills and techniques that I learned at the Nonviolent Resistance Boot Camp that I went to over the weekend with about 200 other Oregonians. Please go back and watch the previous installments, and there will be several more. At the end, when I filmed everything, I will put it all together as one big long compilation on YouTube, because I always get requests when I do a longer series like, hey, can you put this together so I can send my friend just like one big long link. So don't worry if you missed one of the videos at the end, I'll have it all together. In the last section, I talked about the 4 core principles of nonviolence, and in this section, I would like to talk about specific methods of nonviolent action. Now, are you familiar with Gene Sharp? He was a political science professor at Dartmouth who wrote extensively about nonviolence. Sharp was the founder of the Albert Einstein Institution, which is focused on advancing nonviolent action skills and techniques. If you haven't read any of his works, I really recommend that you start at least with From Dictatorship to Democracy, and then The Politics of Nonviolent Action. I think a lot of people fundamentally misunderstand and underestimate the power of nonviolent action, and they tend to think that nonviolence is peacefully demonstrating. Y'all, Sharp identified more than 190 different methods of nonviolent action. I promise you, it's not just marching around with your cardboard sign. While that does have its place, and we should not minimize the fact that for most people, stepping into nonviolent work, stepping into nonviolent resistance against the regime, that usually, most often, looks like people showing up to a really accessible, low threshold to entry kind of event like No King's Day, a very safe, family-friendly protest event where people can dip their toe in the water. I gotta put my bracelet down. People can dip their toe in the water. They can try out for the first time. They can take that little step of courage, the first time they speak out. Really good to have those very accessible, non-violent action things that people can do, like No King's Day. You got your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, members of your congregation who've never stood up against fascism before. They have never done any of this work before. Invite them to No King's Day. That is the place where we draw people into the movement. We help them feel connected and successful. We tell them that your contribution matters. Your courage matters. You have power here. We give them the confidence to start taking these bigger steps, these other 189 plus nonviolent direct actions that Sharp lays out. Don't worry, I am not going to list all 190, but they do fall into basically 3 categories, and I want to cover those categories for the rest of this video. Oh, real quick here, I also want to say that, just because Sharp identified 190 different nonviolent direct actions, that doesn't mean that that is an exhaustive list or that we can't invent new ones. In fact, every time we see people, human beings are creative, adaptive. Every time we see people have to resist an authoritarian regime, they are inventing new tactics. They are coming up with new actions. They are creating new ways to effectively, non-violently resist. There are people right now in this period in history in the United States of America who are inventing brand new ways to stand up against dictators, to stand up for our rights, for democracy. Maybe it's going to be you. Maybe you've got ideas for a strategy or a skill or a tactic and action that has never been done before. Do not discount how creative we can all be. Do not discount the fact that we absolutely can create new things. We are going through this period. We've never done this before, right? I know there are lots of us who never thought that we would have to live through this moment in history. We thought that history was something that happened to people in the past and not something that we were going to have to live through. But maybe you're going to be one of those people in the history books because you invented something new. You carried out a direct action that made all of the difference. You devised a direct action that other people carried out that made all of the difference. In permaculture, we always try and be solution-minded, right? I'm looking for the opportunities. I'm looking for the chance to do something that is effective, that moves the needle, that advances our cause. And I encourage you to try and take up that outlook, that framework as well. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting a little pumped up. Okay, I'm getting that fourth wind, even though I haven't had any caffeine since 3 p.m. Okay, so the 3 categories that Gene Sharp kind of, organizes different direct actions into. Number 1 is protests and persuasion. These are actions like No King's Day that are designed to express publicly our opposition to what the regime is doing and to raise awareness. You would be surprised how many Americans are still really checked out and they don't know all of the terrible things. Y'all, most people are not like politics wonks like you and I are, right? Most people are just trying to get through their day, and unless the regime is doing something that directly impacts their life, they may be completely oblivious, right? So public protests like No King's Day raise awareness. People can't take action if they don't know what it is that they need to be taking action against. They can't defend democracy if they don't know that it is imperiled. So examples of the protest and persuasion category: marches, honkin' waves, the pajama protest in front of the ICE building where everybody shows up in onesies and you eat your breakfast. It's also things like passing around petitions to get them signed. It's also things like street theater, rallies, prayer vigils, the vigil like we saw at the ICE building where it was a silent prayer vigil and people came and they dropped flowers in front of the ICE building. It could be a concert where everybody's singing. It could be a die-in like ones that happened during the AIDS Act Up movement, where people go and represent all the lives that have been lost and they lay down, sometimes with fake headstones, sometimes just the representation of, them laid out. Group number 2 is non-cooperation. This is boycotts, labor strikes, refusal to comply, right? This is when the regime says, you must do something, and we say, no, we won't. As our leader said, we stop yelling at the building and we start getting involved in a more interactive way. Protests and persuasions were about expressing our feelings and raising awareness. Non-cooperation are actions that are about withholding your support from an unjust system. The Target boycott is a great example. Y'all, there is so much power with non-cooperation. I said in one of the earlier videos, when I was discussing the 4 core principles of nonviolent resistance, principle number 1 is that power depends on consent. It depends on our participation with the system. So choosing not to participate, even just saying like, no, I don't think so, no, thank you. You don't have to actively oppose the regime, but just not going along with it. That in and of itself has power, right? When we look at our military, at the moment when Donald Trump says, I need you to fire on civilians, we don't need the members of the military to turn their weapons against Trump. What we need them to do is just say, no, thank you, I'm not going to comply. Refusing to follow unjust orders, illegal actions, unjust rules, crucially important and far more powerful than we tend to remember. Okay, we had protest and persuasion, we had non-cooperation, and here comes number 3, nonviolent intervention. This is where we really gum up the works, y'all. This is obstructivist. This is where we get in the way. This is not simply saying, no, thank you, I'm not going to. This is where we say, I'm not going to let you. These are direct actions that directly disrupt harmful practices or create alternative practices, right? So examples are blockades, encampments, community-led mutual aid, right? The last one, the mutual aid one, I think is really important. This is where the system says, we're going to abandon a certain vulnerable group, or we're going to target a certain vulnerable group, and you say, no, we're going to make sure that we take care of those people. You're creating an alternative system that is in opposition to the goals of the regime. Let's look at an example, though, of disrupting a harmful practice. Let's say that you're at church on a Sunday morning, and earlier this year, Donald Trump suspended a Biden-era policy that forbids ICE from going into schools, hospitals, and churches. And we've had multiple reports of people being snatched from Catholic church property. So you're at church and there is an undocumented family in your congregation. And ICE all of a sudden pulls up en masse in your church parking lot, and these folks are trapped in the building. If they leave, ICE is going to snatch them. Okay, y'all already have a plan in place to protect the undocumented immigrants in your congregation. You have a group of people who go around to the back of the building, and real quick before ICE walks around the back, they chain the doors shut, they lock them, and then they go and hide the keys somewhere. And the rest of you form a blockade at the front of the building, and you are not going to let ICE in. And you have a social media person on your team, or multiple ones, who are documenting what's happening. They're filming, they're live streaming it, they're letting the whole world know. ICE is trying to break down the doors of our church and snatch members of our congregation. We want everybody to know what's happening. Maybe you all handcuff yourselves to the door. Maybe you all handcuff yourselves to each other. You form a blockade and you don't let ICE in. You are obstructing the regime from being able to carry out their heinous, awful, illegal plans. Now, that's not something that you do on a whim. That is a complex action that you have carefully planned before, where you are working really hard to establish a safety protocol and make sure that everybody is very well trained. Right? Whatever of these methods you choose, safety must remain central. You have to craft a plan, you have to game out possible scenarios. You also have to make sure that the members are highly trained with distress tolerance and de-escalation skills, that you have marshals, medics, legal observers whenever you can. In the next video, I want to talk more about strategy and planning.